it's loud. I'm going to go through this PowerPoint. You can interrupt me if you have questions. Feel free to. This can be a discussion. I'm going to go through these things, and then we're going to look at a bunch of pictures and analyze them. So this will take a little while, but after we're done, we will. I'll have you continue working on your abstraction project. Also, before we do this, I want to go into Blackboard and show you a couple things. So I want to make sure everybody checks in for this week on Blackboard. Just want to remind you of that. Everybody checked in last week, so we're good with that. I'm going to share my screen. I've updated the schedule on the syllabus. So we have the original design syllabus, and then we have the schedule here. And it reflects a few changes in our meetings and our due dates for assignments. So the assignment 2 critique will be, let's see, it's been moved to tomorrow instead of today. That's where it originally was. And assignment 3 is going to be due on week 5, Tuesday. So you're going to have 2 extra days to work on that because I think it's going to take a little longer than I previously scheduled. So you can look at that. If you have any questions, let me know about it. Send me an email, or you can ask during our class times as well. Does that make sense? Everybody good? Okay, so I'm going to go into this PowerPoint. Share screen, PowerPoint. We're going to be discussing Gestalt principles. All right. So who here has heard of Gestalt? Anybody? Can you define it? Anybody? How about, no? Ruby, can you define it?
I've heard the term before. That was all I got.
And it's used across a lot of disciplines, and even in like casual conversation when they're talking about groups of things. So a good way to think is the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And it's a psychological term which means unified whole. It refers to theories of visual perception developed by German psychologists in the 1920s. The theories attempt to describe how people tend to organize visual elements into groups or unified wholes when certain principles are applied. So basically, it's the way we see things. And they figured out that the things I'm going to point out are universal among people. We tend to see things in this way. So according to Gestalt theory, visual information is understood as a whole before it is examined separately. And information which is unrelated in size, shape, orientation will appear chaotic and unresolved. Gestalt is grouping, so it's making groups of things. And when you're presented with a visual image, the tendency is to unconsciously try to create order and make connections. These groupings are by location, orientation, shape, color, subject matter, size, etc. Has anybody ever found yourself trying to make groups out of things you're looking at? Maybe you're just staring at a ceiling and you're seeing patterns within the ceiling. Everybody have that experience? I think it's a pretty common experience for everybody. Oops. So reality is reduced to the simplest form possible. And when you're confronted with visual information, you'll attempt to organize that information into the simplest form possible. You'll mentally process visual information to create a mental image that's symmetrical, that contains the simplest shapes possible and the fewest number of shapes. So if you have a large group of things that come together, you're going to try to simplify it and make it into simple patterns. And it's called prognons. So Gestalt makes you see the face in this picture of Mars. And it's basically the Gestalt principle of proximity, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. This is what it really looks like, but from a distance we see a face. Gestalt also made this lady see the Virgin Mary in this piece of moldy bread, and she ended up paying like $2,500 for it on eBay. So, but it's Gestalt. So the first Gestalt principle we're going to talk about is figure and ground. We all know what figure and ground is. We've talked about it already. The eye will differentiate an object from its surrounding area. This figure, the object, will be a form, silhouette, or shape, and will be seen as a figure or object, or the subject of the picture. The surrounding area will be seen as ground. Most images we encounter will have a figure and a ground. Everybody understand what figure and ground is, or do I need to go over it again? So the principle shows our perceptual tendency to separate the whole figure from their backgrounds based on one or more of a number of possible variations, such as color, shape, and size. Why do you think we do this? There's a scientific reason we do this.
Do what? Separate things mentally into a figure and ground, or separate them, or?
Yes.
Isn't it just like
I
a
think-
survival
Pardon me,
instinct?
sir?
Isn't it just like a survival instinct to be able to like figure out if something is like a creature friendly or not?
That's exactly it. They think it's developed. It's an evolutionary trait. So like when proto-humans are on the savannah in Africa and they're looking for patterns within the grass so they can see predators that might kill them. Make sense? So that's why we separate figure from ground. The focus at any moment is the figure. Everything that else is not figure is ground. And we have a couple relationships for those. We got a clear figure and ground relationship. So in this picture, what's the figure? It's the two foreground people in the bumper car, right? And then the ground falls behind them. We're looking at them and everything else kind of goes blurry. You can also have an ambiguous figure and ground. You can either see this as a single Wolverine or two Batmans. Everybody see that? When you think about figure and ground in your design, you need to be aware that the figure and ground should work together. You should look at the overall shape of the ground or negative space and see how that interacts with the figure in positive shapes. So when you have your figures set against the background, you want to think about how they interlock together. You can see them both as separate shapes. You can see the figure together as shapes. You remember on the first assignment, I had you circle the stuff that was the figure within the composition, and then look at that separately from the ground, which you put the diagonal lines across. You need to look at those things together and make sure those shapes are working together. Okay. So like this one, you got your figure, the Batman figure, and then you have the yellow intersecting it. And also, if you flip the poster over, you'll see the penguin figure with the black area intersecting it. But they lock together. Do you see that? See how they work together in unison? You got to think about the ground and the shape of the ground as you're doing the figure. This has kind of like a U shape around the focal point, and that negative space is really working to cause you to look at the focal point. Does that make sense? This is a nice figure and ground relationship too. This is a case where gravity is bringing you back down this way, but you got your figure pointing up this way, and then the negative ground comes back and forces us back down to the figure. Here's a nice breakdown of that composition just as shapes. And this is really how I want you to start thinking of things. I want you to think of them as an arrangement of shapes within your picture plane. This is good abstraction of this image. So everybody get figure and ground? Okay, so the second Gestalt principle is similarity, and it occurs when things look like one another. You see a likeness of objects. Items that are similar to one another tend to be grouped together. And you remember when I was talking about patterns to some people with this last assignment, I talked about giving a pattern a little friend across the picture plane, right? So if there's two patterns that are the same, similar, they look alike, you're going to make a relationship between those two things. So it can help you fill an area and make it related to another area within the picture just because they look alike. Does that make sense? That's a way you can create balance. So given a choice by the brain, you're going to select the simplest and most stable form to concentrate on. The law stresses the importance of basic shapes in the forms of squares, circles, and triangles. We see basic forms in similarity in basic forms quicker than we'll see a bunch of different forms together. So if you have 5 arrows pointing up and you have 1 arrow pointing down, what becomes the focal point? Kathy, I can't hear you. You're right, though. Your gesture was correct.
The one pointing down,
Yeah, and why is that?
because it's different than the others.
Exactly. It's that simple. It's nothing to overthink here. So somebody new answer this one. And I'm not like, I'm glad the people that are speaking up, but how many groups do you see here? Come on, don't make Kathy and Ruby do only talking, and Sarah.
I see 5, but I might be wrong.
What 5 do you see?
I see the four sets of dots, and then the cross in the middle. I'm using that as a group, and then
That's exactly right. You can see 5 groups, or you can see 2, and either way works. But there is a relationship between the dots and the squares, and they relate to one another. Does that make sense? So when there's spacing between similar elements, you might make them into different groups. How many groups do you see here, anybody?
I would say 3.
What 3 do you see?
I see the squares, the circles, and then the shape that the circles make into a triangle.
I think that would count as 2, but I can see what you're saying there. Just because of the triangle and the squares. But yeah, I see the groups as well. How about here, Guadalupe? On the left, how many do you see?
I would say, well, 2, the square and the circles, but the square as a whole, but the circles.
The circles make the square, so that's 1, right? And then on the right, how many groups do you see?
Okay, well then 3.
So the spacing makes you see 3 different groups there as well, but you relate those groups because of similarity. So you can use similarity to create emphasis and create focal points, like the 5 arrows pointing up and the 1 pointing down. And you can use similarity to create rhythm. And whenever you interrupt that rhythm, it'll cause the viewer to look at an interruption. So this is a nice even rhythm here. And when you have an interruption in that rhythm, it creates a separate group. Do you see that? Everybody with me? So here's an example of similarity in action. What's the focal point here? And this is anybody. Anybody can answer this.
The yellow guy.
Yellow guy.
Yeah, the little yellow guy. And how many groups do you see here?
2.
Yeah, you can see 2, or you can see 3 or 4. Like if you really just wanted to go with color, you would see 2. But if you want to go with value as well, you can see the yellow one, then the lighter ones, the medium ones, and the dark ones. Everybody see that? And it's okay to break it up either way, but it's similarity that's making you do it. But that little yellow guy really separates himself from the crowd because of color. So you can use similarity to create relationships between items in a composition. This can help balance the composition and create unity. So we got the 2 people here. They're very similar. We got spacing here, and then 2 here. And that group of 2 and that group of 2 help balance each other out in this composition. You understand that? That makes sense? So that's similarity. Now everybody gets similarity, and the next one I'm going to show you confused. And the next one's proximity. The difference between similarity and proximity is proximity are things that are grouped together within close proximity to one another. They're close to each other, but they don't necessarily have to look alike. Does that make sense? So if you squish them together, you're going to make a relationship between those things. Objects near each other tend to be grouped together. Our brain more closely associates objects close to each other than it does when objects are farther apart. You can use proximity to create groups by placing objects close to one another. They can also be used to create larger overall shape from a bunch of smaller shapes. and the key point is they don't have to be the same shape. So proximity, these are similar shapes, but we've squished them together to make a larger overall shape, and that's proximity that's doing that. Does that make sense to y'all? So when we saw that face on Mars that I showed you earlier, or the toast, the stuff that made up those shapes of the face, that's proximity in action. Okay. This is proximity as well. This is called my funny Valentine. It's supposed to look like a face, and proximity is making that thing look like a face. It looks like Animaniacs to me, if you all are familiar with Animaniacs. And I showed you this. Proximity, with this one, you see how she's a little closer to this group? You could count this as two groups, but you could also count these in front being separate from the back because they're close to one another. And the key point I want to point out about Gestalt principles, they're not mutually exclusive. There can be multiple things happening in one picture. There's another thing happening making her the focal point of this picture, and that's called the Gestalt principle of containment, and we'll go over that in a few minutes. Proximity is the simplest way to achieve unity, and a lot of artworks will use this technique. Without proximity, you must put greater stress on other methods to unify an image. How many groups do you see here? Anybody?
2?
2 or 3, yeah. I see 3, but two's just fine too. And why do you make 2 groups out of it?
Well, I see the crowd on the right, and I'm kind of including that guy that's standing out on his own, and then the one guy all the way to the left.
Yep.
It doesn't seem like he's a part of the crowd.
That's correct. Now, there's another principle that I don't talk about in this slideshow, and it's called the law of common fate. And it's where we tend to go towards where everything's going towards. And this is the common fate right here. Both sides of these are ending up here. So you could make a group out of all of them together because of the law of common fate. That make sense? Well, I'm not going to make you deal with that. It's just when you have a bunch of arrows pointing in one direction, you tend to go in that direction. That's going to coincide with another thing we're going to talk about. Now, here's an example of bad proximity, and we've all seen like signs like this, right? Pretty bad proximity, I think. Now, if you're going to be a graphic designer, you got to think about how you're arranging words to make sure people aren't reading them in the wrong order. There's a funny meme about like that's supposed to have a hopeful message, but it's a really depressing message. I don't remember what it is, but I got to track that down from the slideshow. Okay, so you all get proximity? It's basically just scrunching things together to make a group. The next one's closure. It occurs when an object is incomplete or a space is not completely enclosed. If enough of the shape is indicated, the viewer perceives the whole by filling in the missing information. Now, I've hinted at this in a previous slideshow, but it's basically there's enough information given so our brains fill in the blanks. Does that make sense, everybody? Now, this is used a lot in like sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. Who likes horror movies in here? Anybody? Or everybody's watched a horror movie, right? A monster movie? Okay. You ever notice the monsters are coming out of the dark and you only see like a tooth and like drool or something like that coming out of the dark? It's because your brain can fill in scarier stuff than they can show on screen. So they use closure to make it scarier. Does that make sense? There's enough information given there that you fill in the blanks. So this is an idea of closure right here. We all have an idea of what this woman looks like without her veil on. And it's different for everybody here. Our experiences are filling in the blanks, but we fill in the fact that there's a woman behind this mask or behind this veil. Whoever watched old Bugs Bunny cartoons? They play with this in Bugs Bunny, and they were aware of Gestalt principles when they were doing Looney Tunes cartoons. But there's an opera or something, and a woman comes out in a veil, and she looks beautiful. And when she takes off her veil, she's got blemishes and big buck teeth and like everything like that. And it's basically Looney Tunes playing with the idea of closure, right? There she is. You also, who sees the white triangle here? Is the white triangle actually there? It's 3 Pac-Man, a greater, less than, and an up symbol, right? But because there's enough information there, and there's a implied line, remember the implied line, between the objects, we see that triangle. And Alien's famous for closure. They always show the alien going back into the darkness, and it's horrifying. It's really good. It's also used in comic books in sequential storytelling. We fill in the areas between the panels, okay? So even though we can't see his legs, and this is a joke about this from a book called Making Comics, we imagine them to be there, so we see him as a whole even though they're not actually there. Does that make sense? So that's closure. The next one is continuation. And this works well with the law of common fate that I was talking about, but it occurs when the eye is compelled to move through one object and continue to another object. And it's your tendency to follow a path through the picture plane and using objects within the picture plane to create those paths. So when we're following that path, we want to smooth the continuation of a line as possible when we're following it, okay? If we break an unusual or a line or make an unusual change in the movement of a line, what does that cause? So if we have a smooth line happening in the picture and there's a line crossing it, what happens at that intersection? What does that become?
A focal point?
That's correct. So it's a way you can make a focal point by interrupting a continuous line. So it's being done in this one. So what's the focal point of this picture? It's a little blurry, I'm sorry, but I think it's a great picture, so I always put it in.
Is it the people?
It's these 3 people in particular. Is that what you were looking at?
Yeah, is it because they interrupt the line of the,
That's exactly why. And they're contrasty too, but they interrupt that smooth line. So it's continuation creating that focal point. And if you can see, they're facing this way, so we would tend to go where they're facing, but we got this runner interrupting it too, so we go back into the picture, and once we get past the people, you follow that line all the way into the background. Does that make sense? And once we're back here, we notice the buildings and this hill coming back this way, so it carries us back this way, which is interrupted by some contrast, so we notice these buildings. When we start following this wall back around, which is interrupted, so it creates another focal area right here. And then we come down here, and you got this like triangle that's pointing us back up into the picture. So there's continuation carrying us all throughout this picture. Does that make sense? Now, when the photographer was filming this, or photographing this, they were looking through their viewfinder to notice all these things, and they got them within frame. So it's done on purpose. This is another example of continuation, but this one is a little more difficult to look at. Now, I'm going to give you an opinion here, but I think it's fact. I think this guy is the best graphic designer alive right now. His name's Chris Ware, and he's a comic artist. His comics are completely depressing, so if you want to read something depressing, read a Chris Ware comic book. But what he's doing here is he's leading you around this page, and in a normal comic book, you would read upper left to bottom right. Everybody understand that? But in this page, he creates a bunch of paths for you to follow. So you go in different directions, not necessarily in one linear way throughout the page, but you'll eventually get throughout the page if you follow all the paths he's created for you. But the first thing he does is he starts you up here because this is by itself. So because of proximity, this is by itself. Does that make sense? And then we see this girl as the focal point of that panel. And because of similarity, we bounce over to that panel. Can you all buy that? And then we have that little line that's leading us down to here, and we follow her eye line over here, which is blocked, which carries us back across this way. And you'll see once you get to here, she's changing her eye line, which can carry us either to here and we go up, or it carries us to here and we go over here, which can carry us over here. But there's paths being made throughout the whole picture plane. Does that make sense? And he's employing a bunch of different Gestalt principles within the page, but the main one is continuation. Does that make sense to everybody? Now, the thing I really want you to point out, or I really want to point out, is this is all on purpose. He's carefully designed this page, which, and all his pages are like this. They're incredible. And the cool thing about it, if you look at these drawings, they look like they're done in Illustrator, right? Wouldn't you say, Ruby? They are all hand drawn, which is ridiculous. Like they're perfectly drawn
Wait, like, but with what material?
with pen and ink.
How do you get? Can you like zoom in on like just one of the color blotches? Like you don't see any lines.
Well, the colors are done digitally, but the black lines are done, and the blue lines, which he changed to from black to blue. But everything's hand drawn, even the dashes. He's just that precise, and it's ridiculous.
Well, like, what about like he hand drew the book and
Yep.
stuff like that?
And
How do you, my brain can't, I'm really bad at this, so maybe that, but like the just perfect, concise color of just like the pages, like the grayish tan in the book. Like
Well, the
typically
col-
there's like,
the colors are done digitally, but the drawing is done traditionally.
okay,
It's just it's ridiculous. He's a machine.
it's weird. Yeah.
So here's a continuation. You see this a lot in like highway photos and things like that. Even though the line is broken, we get that continuation carrying us back into the picture plane. And this is an actual line going into an implied line, which picks up as another actual line, which ends and takes us here to an implied line and keeps going back. But does everybody start in the front here and then go backwards? Yeah, so it's an artist starting with that front thing with high contrast. It's actually closer to us, so we tend to notice things closer to us as well. But the continuation carries us throughout the picture plane. Everybody get continuation? Okay, the next one's containment. You see it all the time in a bunch of different genre or just disciplines within art. It can be used, this can even be used in interior design. It's used quite a bit in interior design, but it's basically putting a frame around the entire composition or a frame around elements within the composition to create emphasis, okay? So you can see here, and we have to imagine this continuing out. They've created a little frame around the O, and this is a textbook example. It's pretty simple. This one has it as well. So the containment of the entire composition is contained within those like little squares with the jars and stuff in it. And it really ties in the composition. This is a containment as well. So if you looked at this figure on just the blue background and there wasn't like this almost grave shape around her, you would tend to go off the edges here, but because it's contained, we tend to stay on the picture plane. And this is containment as well, and he's creating a focal area with containment. So what's the focal point of this picture?
The man.
What part of the man? What do we tend to look at when we look at people?
The face.
Yeah, the face. So those are correct answers. So his face is the primary focal point. And I want you to look at the containment within this picture. This area is contained in the stars of the flag. Everybody see that? Then his entire body is contained in the stars and stripes of the flag. So we have containment containing his entire body. Now there's one thing breaking that containment, and it's this piece of paper. So he's putting emphasis on this piece of paper by breaking the containment. But he's containing the figure in the center of the picture plane with the flag. And then because of color, those browns and grays, this is containing everything else. So it really ties in the composition. It feels comfortable except for this spot that is breaking the containment. Does everybody see that? Now it's not mutually exclusive either. We got the contrast of this helping you see this, right? We also have the arms pointing right at it after going from the focal point. That helps you there. So it's not just working, the containment working to create a focal area by itself. It's all these things together. But it is the containment working as well to create a focal area. Does that make sense? Now, the thing I want you to think is when he's drawing this, when he's painting this, it's not, it's all planned out. But the plan comes when he's doing thumbnails. Who's done thumbnail sketches before? This is what I want you to do for your next assignment. I want you to start doing thumbnail sketches before you go to your final stuff, okay? And thumbnail sketches are small sketches like 2 inches by 1 inch or whatever. They're really small. You're figuring out the basic elements of the composition and where to place them. And that's when you can figure out things like, say you're drawing somebody sitting in a cafe and there's a series of windows. You could frame a person in one of those windows, and you would do that in the thumbnail stage before you figure out all the smaller details within the composition. Does that make sense? So these people aren't thinking when they go in that I'm going to do this design and I'm going to use containment here. They'll be doing the sketches and they'll be like, oh, this is, I need to create emphasis on this object or whatever I want to make the focal area. Oh, I can use containment in this situation. Or I can use the law of common fate to point everything towards the focal point. Or I can use similarity. If I can, like, say I'm going to make a crowd, I could put him in red and everybody else in browns, right? Whoever saw Schindler's List? Anybody see that movie? The little red girl walking through the black and white film.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing, right? And that's similarity being used. But does that make sense? None of this is on accident. It's all on purpose. And again, we want purposeful design in this class. So now we're going to go through a bunch of images, and I'm going to ask you what's the main Gestalt principle being used. It may be a few of them. And I want you to keep in mind they're not mutually exclusive. There may be multiple principles being used in each image. I'm going to have you analyze this. So if you got a pen, I want you to write down the Gestalt principles real quick. Okay, so the first one is figure and ground. And that one probably won't need to be said unless it's really obvious, because every one of these pictures I'm going to show you has a figure and ground relationship. The second one is similarity. The next one is proximity. The next one is closure. The next one is containment. And the next one is continuation. Those are the things we're going to be looking for in this image. Now, the reason we're going through these images is so you can get the terminology down, okay? And again, the German scientists didn't invent these things, they defined them. So they figured out this is how everybody's seeing things through study. So let's go through the pictures now. So this is the first picture. What Gestalt principle is being used here mainly? What's the focal point of the picture?
Captain America.
Captain America.
Captain America, and specifically his head with the A on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's making you see that? What Gestalt principles?
His shield is making me see that, but
How many groups do you see here?
is it containment?
There is some containment because of the edge of the picture plane and the white around them. That's
Yeah.
certainly one of them, but how many groups do you see here?
Just one.
Do you see one?
Two.
Is it two?
It's two. Who said two?
I did.
What two do you see?
Captain America and the people below his feet.
Yeah, so like this up here set up off of these two down here. And Kathy, I can certainly see it as one, but I see it as two as well, because the people up here feel separate from the people down here to me. Can you buy that? So Kathy, what is that called when we have this group here and this group here? What Gestalt principle is making up those two groups?
Is it proximity?
That is correct. It's proximity. So in this picture, we have proximity and containment. Everybody with me? Okay, this is by my favorite artist, Kent Williams. I really like this painting. What Gestalt principles do you see here? And there's a few.
I'm gonna take a guess and say figure and ground.
There's definitely figure and ground. What else? And that's not just you. Anybody can answer that. I'm not trying to single you out.
Continuation.
Yeah, where's the continuation?
Well, I start kind of like with their arm connection and then go down the sword, which goes into the guy in the middle, and then the thing that he has kind of like swirls around and then goes back into the person on the right.
So there's definitely paths being created within the picture. Yeah, I agree. Yep. What else?
I'd say like similarity because their poses are like mirroring each other almost, so it draws our attention.
I could see that, and it makes you jump from one figure to the other.
Mm-hmm.
What else? There's more.
Closure.
And where's the closure?
Again, kind of where their arms are, and then there's like spaces that are in between, but it kind of creates like a framing around.
So yeah, there's like a circle that goes around their hands, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you're imagining, like you see the lower part of the circle, but you kind of imagine the upper part because of this and just kind of the motion of the brush strokes in there, right? And then there's one more. What is this doing? Rui, do you have a guess?
Monkey in the back, is that what you were referring to, or just a guess for
Yeah.
what the mechanism means?
That circle is doing something.
Continuation, it's keeping us like looping because spirals and diagonal lines tend to.
There is continuation happening, but it also has a function. What's the focal point of the picture? Anybody know?
Their hands, I guess.
Yep. And why is their hands the focal point? There's a few reasons. I don't want to put you on the spot. I can answer this too.
It's emphasized.
It's emphasized. How is it emphasized?
I want to say because it's like circled around, like with the character in the back.
Yeah. What is that called? There's a Gestalt principle that in our list. We got, okay, I'll go through them. We got figure and ground, similarity, proximity, continuation, containment, and I'm forgetting one, figure and ground.
Is it containment?
That's correct. So it's basically putting a frame around the hands. Now there's other reasons. It's also the intersection of the two. It's the placement. It's the contrast. There's a lot going on there, but containment is working really well. The figures are containing the hand. That circle is containing the hand. Make sense? And he's thinking about the Gestalt principles when he's putting this stuff together. How about this one? What's the focal point of this one?
The astronaut.
What part of the astronaut?
The head.
Yep, the head. Why?
The birds are leading you to the head,
Kind of lead the way.
or like on the way to the head. I guess.
The birds are definitely like proximity with the head, so that larger mass makes you look at the head. So that's
The helmet's also the thing in the most detail.
so that's areas of greater and lesser development. That's more development in that area. That's correct. Contrast is out as well, right?
Mhm.
So we follow the birds up, but what do we follow down?
Is there some type of closure in here, even though it's like really lit?
There's absolutely closure in here because you imagine the complete birds. You also imagine that hose going behind his back, right? And that hose leads us down into the picture plane. And what is that? Which Gestalt principle is that?
Continuation?
Continuation, that's correct. That makes sense, everybody? This is by an artist named Jeremy Geddes. I think it's really cool. Okay, so this has a couple of them. This is the one where we can mention figure and ground, and I'm going to mention it. This has a really strong figure and ground relationship. You see how the figure separates itself from the ground in a really strong manner? Then there's two other Gestalt principles that are the main ones in this. Can anybody name them?
Containment,
Containment, yeah. Where do you see the containment?
like above the figure and below, like.
Yeah, so the shape of the mask contains the figure, correct?
Mhm.
Yeah. And what else? What other Gestalt principle?
Similarity.
What do you see in similarity?
I look at the background because
The lines in the background being a certain
Mhm.
proportion compared to the ones in the foreground? I can see that, yeah. So similarity is creating the figure and ground. That's not what I was looking for, but that's certainly one of them.
Continuation,
Continuation, where are you seeing the continuation?
with the ropes behind everything.
Yep, and do you see how he's using those as a directional force to carry you around the picture plane? You follow those lines around after you get away from the focal point. So he's using all three of those. Actually, all four, counting figure and ground. We've all seen this one, right? Y'all remember this one? Now when you look at it, do you see the incredible amount of containment he's using in this to create little sections and little compositions within the larger composition? I think it's pretty great. He also uses continuation with that white line I pointed out in the original slideshow I showed you this in. But do you all see the containment in there? What ones are being used in this? I know some of these are completely weird, but I really like them, so.
closure
Yep, where do you see closure?
with a lady on the bottom, and we can just finish it.
How you imagine the rest of the lady?
Mhm.
Yep, I see it in a couple more places. I see kind of a circle being created by the dust coming up. Can you all see that? And I also see his leg as a whole, even though it's split right there. The closure is certainly one of them. And you imagine a wider world because it's misty. Does everybody see that? Okay, what other Gestalt principle?
Continuation?
Yep. So you go from figure to figure because of that pole in the middle, right?
Yep.
I guess that's proximity creating continuation because they're all touching one another. But yeah, that's a good call. All right, so I showed you this in the first slideshow I ever gave you. Isn't this terrifying, this picture? Like, look at it close. Is that a blood stain on the wall? I don't know. I mean, it's just creepy. All right, what's the primary focal point of this? Ruby,
I want to say like, oh,
go ahead.
I want to say like the light in the dark room.
Yeah, so when you look away and look back, that's what you see first. It's the primary focal point. So it's this reflection here, right?
Yeah.
And what Gestalt principle is helping reinforce that? Major one.
Is it? I'm really bad with the names. Containment, because it's being like everything else is super dark, so that's bright, and it.
Exactly. So
Okay.
the containment of the doorway and the window in the background. So what this does is it makes you feel kind of trapped because of all the containment happening in this picture. And if you look at the negative space working with the positive space in the doorway, you got a big rectangle that's coming up into a white kind of U shape that surrounds it. Everybody see that? So if you were to break this up into two shapes, you could have a black rectangle coming up into a white background with a white dot in the middle of it. And it's simple. Like if you reduce that to essential forms, you'd have a simple composition that really works because of containment. Everybody with me? Are you starting to see these things as simpler shapes? Because I really want you to think about that as you're looking at pictures. There's some really good ones in this. What Gestalt principles?
Continuation
Yep. Where do you see continuation?
on the lines in the road and then kind of mimics the buildings.
Yep. So it's really like cool and sneaky how he did this one. So it takes you back with the lines in the road. Are you with me on that one? And then the arrows bring you back this way. And I think that's really cool the way it does it. There's another Gestalt principle. Other than continuation, what Gestalt principle?
Similarity.
Yeah, where are you seeing similarity?
The two section of the buildings, the one on the left and one on the right, and then the one on the back.
Yeah, so I see this building and this building related because they're the same color and the same shape. Can you buy that? And then I see this one separate, and it's because of similarity, because of the color. So I agree with you. But really good composition. Go to the next one. Did we go over this painting already?
Oh, actually, we did last in a different class, so I'll keep my mouth shut for this.
Keep your mouth shut on this one, but that's cool. This, what Gestalt principles do you see here as you look at this painting? Actually, what's the primary focal point? Look away and look back. What do you see right away? What part of the sink?
I want to say the drain.
Yeah, the drain. So you're looking at the drain, and it's because of what Gestalt principle is making you look at the drain? And that, I don't want to put pressure on you. Anybody can answer that.
Containment.
Yeah, so that you have containment happening. You also have high contrast, making you look at the drain. Everybody with me? That's the most contrasty part. Okay, so there's containment happening throughout this picture, and it's really telling a story with this picture. Now, this is by an artist named Antonio Lopez Garcia, and he paints a lot of really heavy subjects. So this painting tells you a story. What do you think the story is? Or what do you think it's about? Kathy, you said something, but I think your mic's up.
No, I was just talking to myself.
Oh.
I don't know. It's like, it's depressing, right?
Yeah.
It's dirty.
Is it all dirty?
Yeah.
I'd say it isn't all completely dirty, but as we go down in the picture plane, it gets dirtier. Are you with me? Okay, so let's look at the obvious things here. What are we looking at here? We're looking at a mirror, right? What should we see in that mirror?
A reflection.
Yeah, and we don't see a reflection there, right? What elements do you see in the picture?
What do you mean? What do you see in the mirror?
No, what do you see throughout the picture? Okay, so we got that white line right in the middle, right? What do we see above the white line? Just say it. What do you see?
I mean, you know, just a bunch of objects, bathroom objects.
Yeah, various things we would use in the bathroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what's separated from one of those objects? There's something that's kind of separated.
The razor,
The razor is taken out of the holder, right? Then I want you to look below the white line. What do we see in the?
another razor.
Yep. And what's weird about that razor?
With just the blade.
It's just the blade, and if you look at the grid in the sink, what's happening?
It's like something's like flowing down off of it.
Yeah, and what do you think that is? What do you think?
Blood.
What do you think it's representing?
Blood.
Yeah. So what does that imply?
Cutting, self-harm.
Self-harm, suicide, right? And the reason I say a suicide is I want you to look above the white line and I want you to see all the lines are basically squared off and at right angles, right? There's a lot of order up there. And we don't see anybody in the mirror up there. What do you think that represents above the white line?
Maybe the person's on the ground, like you don't see a reflection.
But symbolically, what does it show us?
They don't see themselves.
What's that?
That the viewer doesn't see themselves, or like you don't see yourselves in the reflection.
Yep, and there's a reason for that. So when we look above this line, this represents something, and I'll tell you right now, Antonio Lopez Garcia is Catholic and he does a lot of religious images. This represents heaven, okay? And this represents the viewer or the person that's viewing not being in heaven. And it represents suicide and what happens to people that commit suicide. And what does this represent?
Hell.
Yep. Do you see it now? So we got the organization above the line. Once we get to the center line, it starts going in a downward direction that leads you to this spot. And it gets more kind of gritty and dirtier as you go down as well. You see that?
What artist is this?
This is Antonio Lopez Garcia. Pretty cool though, right? Now, this has never been explained to me. It's all in the picture. You can see it all there. And it's all by design, and he did it all on purpose. Should we move on? Yep, let's move on. So containment's the main Gestalt principle in here. I just like to throw a painting like this in there once in a while to show you that these artists are really thinking things out. They're not just doing, this isn't just a still life of a bathroom, okay? And the fact that these lines go from straight to diagonal as we go down is not just him drawing what he sees. He's playing with the perspective to enhance the message of the image. All right, what Gestalt principle, what's the main Gestalt principle we see here? How many types of buildings do you see?
Three or four?
3 or 4, and what's making you see different groups? What Gestalt principle?
The colors and design.
Yep, so what Gestalt principle is that?
Is it similarity?
That's correct. Because they look alike, we tend to group them together. There's also proximity happening somewhat, but like we see that those buildings in the front because of the orange roofs. We see that one on the right because it's a paler version. And then we see some contrast in the back. And it's the similarity of the look of those items that are making us group them together. So that's correct. That make sense, everybody? So primary focal point of this picture.
Is it the person?
Yeah, I would say it's the guy because of the amount of contrast. Where do you go from that guy though?
Up to the mountains or down to the rocks?
I would tend to go to the rocks because they're so close and so dominant.
Mm-hmm.
And where do we go once we hit the rocks?
To the right with the grass?
I would go from rock to rock.
Oh, well, yeah.
I go from rock to rock to rock to rock to rock. And then I go back to him and look at his gaze up into the mountains. So there's a path created. And what Gestalt principle is that?
Continuation?
That's correct. So Electra's killing all these people. She's the lady in the red. I don't know if anybody's seen the Daredevil TV show on Netflix or read the comic books, but this is Electra Assassin. She's a badass. So when Bill Sienkiewicz, the artist of this, is doing the page, he's using similarity to take you from white to dark to white to dark because there's a nice rhythm built up. But there's one panel in particular that stands out from the rest. Which one is it?
Would it be the white one with red in it?
This one here with the head?
Yeah,
And why is that?
because it's the one that stands out for having more white and the red.
That's correct. So he's playing with because Gestalt principle. What Gestalt principle is he playing with here to get you to notice that panel? I mean, you're seeing the right things. I just want to.
Containment?
Pardon?
A containment or similarity?
There's containment happening in everyone, but similarity is the one. That's correct. So what he's done here is he's kind of created a rhythm because of proportion within within each frame, but also with the contrast in each frame. There's high contrast in all of these, or there's darker values in all of these. So these would read as a darker value, and then this one reads as higher contrast. So he's interrupting that 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1 into. There's kind of a interruption in the rhythm here that makes you notice that panel. You all see that? And again, he's doing this on purpose. What Gestalt principles are happening here?
I feel like I keep saying continuation, but continuation.
There's some continuation. What else?
Proximity.
Proximity. Yeah, I can see proximity. What else?
Similarity?
Similarity. What's your similarity that you're seeing?
Well, within the colors, right? So, the two people in the
There's
middle.
no reason, like, I think you're like tending to want to overthink this. There's no reason to overthink it. It's as simple as that. Colors are making you see a couple groups here. And proximity is helping you see a couple groups here. Make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, this one. This little guy right here. What's the primary focal point of this picture? Look away and look back. What do you see first?
The rocket.
Which rocket? There's a bunch of rockets.
The big one in the front.
So why do you see that? I mean, there's many reasons. What Gestalt principle makes you see that, first of all?
Figure and ground.
Figure and ground, yeah. What else?
Similarity.
Similarity, yeah. What else?
Containment.
Containment, for sure. What else?
Proximity.
And proximity. Those are the ones, all of those are working together to help you see that. Ruby, were you trying to get the list out when everybody was trying to, like, speaking up? That's okay.
No, I was muted and I didn't realize. So I started talking and went, oops. But it's fine.
Look at this. There's a few reasons we see it. It's isolated in this whole negative space area, so it's containment. We also have high contrast that's making us see it as well. We also have this little spot right here breaking the containment, so it makes it stand out. That's also a way they created depth within the image. Everybody see that? We also have a few different groups here. How many groups do you see?
3.
Yeah, you can see 3 or 4. So this is a group here. You could group these two together because they're right next to each other. And then I see this group here and this group here. What Gestalt principle is making me see those groups? It's not similarity.
Proximity.
Proximity, that's correct. Y'all see that? This is by Franklin Booth. What Gestalt principles are happening here? What's primary focal point? Look away, look back. What do you see first?
The man.
Which man?
The one with the, I don't know if it's like a bamboo stick or a sword.
Yeah, right here. Why do you see him first?
The contrast and just like the way it's separated from the grass and the color of his, I don't know if it's a turban or hair or in his shirt and his pants.
Yep, that's all correct. We also see him there because he's placed on that third and he really stands out on that third. Everybody see that? So you could break this one down into one of the what do you call it? The configurations we did on the first assignment. You see that? If we broke this down to the rule of thirds, we'd see him and the intersection of the thirds, particularly his hand. So we had two verticals creating 3 different sections here, and 2 horizontals creating 3 equal but separate sections on the vertical. He would fall at the intersection of those, that hand. Does that make sense? So where do we go from him?
The
The
tiger.
elephant.
I think the tiger is the correct answer. Why would I go to the tiger?
Because if you're starting with the guy in the middle, his bamboo stick is
Yep.
pointing up towards the tiger.
What kind of line is that? No pressure.
Implied line.
Continuation. Or it's continuation, but it's I forgot the name of the line.
Implied.
Yeah, that's an implied line. What other type of line do we have there?
Is it a cycle or something because of the eyes? The way he's
Psychic, yes. Psychic line. So we're following both those lines of the tigers. Then we end up here because of the contrast. Everybody see that? Then I would go to the elephant, Ruby.
The only reason I said elephant is because, well, I didn't see the tiger at all when I first looked at this. Like, it blended in with the grass to me. So I just went elephant, or I went person, and then I went, oh, elephant, because it was just big, I guess was my thought. But
I can see the argument for it, but he's trying to take it here. And there's also a little containment happening here. You see that?
nah, I see it. I see it. You're totally right. I just didn't see the tiger. So I was like, that tiger.
And then we go here and we ended up at the trunk of the elephant, which takes us back over here. And we follow like contrasts over here too, which leads us to the shadow and its rear end back down the leg. And what is that? What is that Gestalt principle that's carrying us through here?
Continuation.
Right. Okay, there's a couple happening here. What are they?
Closure.
Yeah, what's the closure in this image?
You see that third skull in the middle, but you have to kind of imagine it, right?
This one here?
Yeah, like you have to imagine the top of the skull.
That's true. And there's also closure happening within what he's doing. What is he doing? What is that center skull doing?
Looking at us.
Yeah, and why is that impossible? Why can't a skull look at things?
Because it has no eyes.
Oh.
Yeah, because it doesn't have eyes. So we imagine that looking at us, and that's closure too.
Yeah.
So that's correct. There's another one. What's the primary focal point of this image? Look away and look back, and what do you see?
Kind of see that blue.
Yeah, that's the focal point right there. And what Gestalt principle is making us see that blue separate from everything else?
Hmm.
Okay, so that blue,
Is it containment?
well, there is containment, yeah, but that's not it.
Just
What color is everything else?
the figure and ground.
Nope. What color is everything else?
Beige and brown.
What color is this?
Blue.
And that's different than everything else. So there's a Gestalt principle that's making that stand out.
similarity.
Similarity. That's correct.
Okay.
You get it?
Yeah.
And the final one is proximity. We make a group out of all 3 of them because they're right next to each other. Does that make sense? She's having a bad day. So what's the focal point of this picture?
The lady.
Yeah, this poor lady right here, right? And what's making her stand out? What Gestalt principle? This is an easy one. Look at the background, the ground, compared to the figure. What's that ground doing? It's framing her, right?
It's proximity.
Well, no, it's containment. See how she's contained within the white?
Gotcha.
Proximity is kind of making you read all this stuff together, so that's certainly a thing. So I see two groups here, the left side and the right side. Are you with me?
Yeah.
And then where do we go from the lady?
Down the stairs.
Down the stairs. And what Gestalt principle is carrying us down the stairs?
Continuation.
Yep, continuation. Now I want to point this out. You remember I showed you that picture of the conch shell the first day? You could overlay it on this picture. You see? So he's using, like, this guy's into sacred geometry. He's thinking about that and the expanding out of things. But it's a spiral composition. Everybody with me? I like it. Gestalt principle?
Continuation.
Yep. What else? Does everybody imagine this to be a whole figure and her legs to be connected? When you're just looking at it, I do. So that's closure. What's the main one in this picture?
Containment.
There's containment. Where do you go in this picture?
Continuation.
Yeah, you follow the lines down, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you beat Stilt Man? Dumbest supervillain of all time. You take out his stilts. Okay, so I show you some bad stuff once in a while. And this is concept art, which you can make mistakes in concept art because they're usually done just to inspire the director or whatever. But if we look at this, what's the primary focal point?
The person on top of the truck.
Is it though?
Well, your eyes do go down to like the headlights of the truck.
So I think that's the mistake in this picture. The focal point isn't as clear as it could be. Now, what Gestalt principle is making you see this guy is separate from this guy?
What guy separate from what guy?
Guy, or it might be a woman on top of the truck, separate from the guy with the toolbox.
The person on top of the truck is facing us. Like, they're doing kind of like the superhero dramatic pose, you know? Like, then the action music comes in and the big quest begins.
I want you to look in terms of value, though. There's a lighter value up here. What's it doing to this figure to make it stand out?
Lightening it.
What Gestalt principle?
Oh, like the actual words. Yes. Containment.
Correct. That's right. But I like to point this out because it's well painted, right? And it's not horribly composed either. It's just there's some mistakes in the contrast that make it stand out less. And I'm going to show you a couple more of those. This one, what's primary focal point?
I would say that's second rock floating because of the more detail it has in it.
Yeah, what part of the second rock is the primary focal point, though?
The middle part, the black one.
Yeah, this little part right here, because of the contrast, right? And we tend to go from here to this head because of contrast here. Will you buy that? Then I follow the gaze of that head up to this statue. And you can go here too. It doesn't matter, either one of those. But you end up here. Where do you go from here?
Down to the little falling rock piece.
Yeah, and Kathy, what Gestalt principle is taking us down here?
It's continuation.
That's correct. So we end up with continuation. Then we end up down here because of the contrast. We look at this little pyramid that carries us over here, and those point you back up into the picture. So there's a lot of movement, but continuation is the main one in this one. How about this one? How many groups?
Go with 3.
I see 3 as well. What 3 do you see?
I see all of the white people and then the people that are in black, and then the buildings. Is that wrong?
Yeah. There's another, like if you were just grouping the people, I could see 3 groups of people as well. So we have these people pointing downwards. We have these people pointing kind of upwards. You see that? And then
Okay.
we have these 2 separate from here. So you can make those different groups out of it. It's right either way. But yeah. How about this one?
Closure.
Yeah, there's a lot of closure in this. This, like, there's a bigger world that you can imagine in this, and it seems like they're in the mist, right? So we see a big wasteland. What I want you to think of it as just simple shapes, though. What Gestalt principle is happening here to carry us around the composition? It's creating a shape like this.
So contain. Oh.
Go ahead. Anybody? Sorry. Continuation from one figure to the other. We have the psychic line that carries us between the figures, and then the shape kind of swings us around. Do you see that? Everybody with me? So I start here because he's more isolated. That shape is more isolated than this one. I follow the psychic line to this guy, and then this carries me back around to him, and I keep going that way. Now I want you to notice the negative space, and I'm just thinking of it as simple shapes, locks in with the positive shape, and they work together to tie you into the composition. Do you all see that? So it's a really well planned out composition. How many groups do you see?
Two.
2, yeah.
2 or 3. If you're looking at similarity, it's 2. If you're looking at proximity, it's 3. And you group the skulls and this separate, right? Everybody with me? Okay. What's the primary focal point of this composition?
Batman.
What part of Batman?
His face.
Yeah, his face. And what Gestalt principle is making that stand out?
Containment.
Yeah, and it's a bat signal containing it, right? There's also proximity making a couple different groups here. We see kind of a triangle shape here, and then a kind of a triangle shape that's coming down here, and they're both pointing up into the picture plane. So there's a nice juxtaposition of 2 triangles coming against each other, if you're just breaking it down to simple forms. Can you see that? Everybody see that? In this one, because it's penetrating that circular shape, that would create a focal point, even if this was just a triangle, a circle, and then another triangle. Can you all see that? And again, even if this was a triangle, a circle, and a triangle, where that point comes into the circle, it's breaking the containment, so it becomes the focal point. How about this one? This is from Moby Dick. Kathy, were you talking or are you just talking to yourself again?
I was just talking to myself, but it's continuation because of the obvious line, right?
The dotted line?
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's something really cool about this continuation when you look at it. You got that dotted line, and you can follow it from his eye, the focal point, right? And it brings us out here and down, and then it brings us off the map, implying a larger journey. So what's that called when we pick it back up here? What do we imagine out here?
Like a psychic line?
Well, no, it's implied line actually, but it's also a Gestalt principle.
Closure?
Closure, yeah. Our brain's filling in a larger journey. And then we come back onto the map and keep following that continuation throughout. And we notice this little spot. Why do we notice this little spot?
Because it breaks the frame.
Yeah, it's breaking the containment. And then we follow it back around and up until we finally get to Moby Dick. So continuation is the strongest one in here. There's also containment. The entire picture's encased in this rectangle. And then we have closure. If you look at the figure here, The only thing really explained are his shirt, his face, his peg leg, and his foot, and maybe this leg. But you can't see any of the interior forms in here. But your brain fills in that there's a leg here and like a hip here. Everybody see that? Manet did that a lot in his paintings, and a lot of those guys around the 1880s did that a lot. They'd use a dark value, and you'd lose some edges within that value. How about this one? There's one Gestalt principle that's working. Actually, there's two that are working very strongly in this picture.
Closure.
Closure, yeah. What is the situation that he's in?
What do you mean?
Like, what is this a picture of?
It's a soldier?
Yeah, he's a soldier in World War I looking across no man's land. So because of the little bit of debris he puts here, and then like this foggy type of landscape, he's implying that whole war zone without actually explaining every little detail on it, which makes it feel more real to me because my brain can fill in the blanks. Does that make sense? So that's a strong closure. And it's also a strong containment with the lighter value containing that dark figure penetrating into it. Everybody with me? It breaks down to really simple shapes. How many groups do you see here?
3.
3. And why do you see 3 different groups?
Because there's the 2 people on the bottom, which I think are Rogue and Wolverine. And then you have the owls, and then you have the woman coming out of the top.
Yep, and there's alligators too. Did you see those?
Oh yeah, I see the alligators now.
You know why you're grouping those 2 together though?
Because they're the same color.
Yeah, so what Gestalt principle is that?
Similarity.
So we got similarity making a group out of these people. We got her a group by herself. We could group her in with the humans, but the spacing is off. So they're separate from one another. So it's similarity creating 3 separate groups here. Everybody see that? Gestalt principle? What's the main one here?
Closure.
Yeah, and what's the closure?
Like the legs.
Yeah, you fill in the blanks of the legs. It feels like she's laying in like tall grass or something. Do you also have closure as your brain's kind of filling in what's in here?
Yeah.
Like an air of mystery, but it's closure. It's also containment. Everybody see that? It's containment here as well. This one's containment as well. What about this one? What's the focal point of this?
The circle.
The
in
middle. Oh,
This-
sorry.
What within the circle, Kathy?
What within the circle?
Yeah, there's something in this circle that's the primary focal point. It's not the circle itself.
The dark part to the right?
Yeah, this whole,
Yeah, okay.
because of containment and contrast. See that? What's the secondary focal point? What stands out beyond this?
Top of the building.
I see those as the tertiary focal point. I see this one as the secondary focal point because when I'm looking at this, I see that out of the corner of my eye. Can you buy that? But these are certainly focal areas up here. But it's basically containment being used in this image. This picture's concept art is genius. So I'm going to explain this one. I'm not going to ask you what's being used here. I'll just explain it. The primary focal point is this sword here, the hilt of the sword, and it's because of contrast. And then we start looking at the soldier that's carrying it, because he's high contrast as well, and we tend to look at faces. And that carries us to this guy because of similarity, and their coats are similar. And we look at him for a second, and then we start going back into the picture plane, noticing similar soldiers here. Everybody with me? Now, what this artist has done is he's convinced us with this group here that all of these are soldiers, even though there's no definition to them. And it's the color and the repetition of some of the forms as we go back into space that are making us see these as complete people, right? So this is similarity creating closure. Everybody with me? It's also areas of greater and lesser development, but it's really smart because he doesn't have to draw every detail in there as he's doing it. And it somehow feels as real as if you were to draw every little detail, because we never see anything in sharp. We don't see everything all at once in sharp focus. That makes sense? Just super smart. It's really good. What Gestalt principle here? What's the primary focal point?
The person,
What part of the person?
the head.
Yeah, it's this contrast here that's making us see the head, right? And what's happening with the person as far as Gestalt principles go?
I think some closure, right?
There is some closure, yeah. I'm not quite sure where his legs are. There's something else. What's helping the person stand out from the rest of the composition?
Is it like proximity, like because they're so close and wrapped in the feathered, darker figure?
Proximity makes you group all this together, but containment makes this stand out. Can y'all buy that? It's the light contained in the dark.
Is it also figure and ground, or is figure and ground only if there's like a shape in the background too?
I mean, figure and ground exists in every image you're going to see. This is a clear, strong figure and ground relationship. So that's definitely a factor in this that helps this stand out.
Okay. Thank you.
I love
I'll
this
look at
painting. This is
myself.
by a guy named Sam Weber. You guys like this? Or is it too weird for you? Who's a painter in here? Anybody? This is watercolor. It's pretty great.
Wait, actually?
Yeah.
It doesn't look like watercolor. It looks like oils or.
It's watercolor, and you can kind of see it in these areas right here where he's infused color into it, but he's so nice with it. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, sweet.
All right. This is a magazine cover, this being the front of the magazine and this being the back. What Gestalt principle carries us from the front to the back? What two Gestalt principles?
Well, continuation.
Yep. So we look at the scarf in his head first, and this carries us over here. What was that? That sounded like a voice. It's basically similarity of color that makes us follow through here, and it gets lighter, whoops, to darker. And that carries us through to the back page. Now, in Ruby, you'll recall this from Digital Foundations. It's good design when you're designing a book or a magazine cover and you have some element that carries you from the front to the back. And this is a good example of that. It's continuation. What's the main Gestalt principle being? Oh man, why does it keep switching on me? The main one being used here. How many groups do you see?
2.
2. And what are the different groups?
The people on the bottom and then everything else on the top.
Yep. And are those shapes alike?
Are they alike?
Are the shapes similar to one another in the groups? Like, are the buildings similar to the shape of the fish?
No.
So it's not similarity. So what Gestalt principle?
Oh, proximity?
Yep, correct. Okay. This is a great picture too. What are we looking at here? Just what's going on? What's the story of the picture?
Like maybe riots?
Yeah, so it's a riot. And how do we know that?
The police shield?
Police shield. Also the debris in the background and the smoke, right?
Uh-huh.
So what Gestalt principle is making us fill in a riot there?
Closure?
Correct. Can anybody see the fire? It's my favorite part of this picture.
Is it the orange tint on his shield?
Yeah, you can see a little reflection on his shield, and it looks like it's reflecting a fire. I think that's pretty sneaky. I don't know. This is the last slide. I just love this image. I don't have anything really brilliant to say about it. I just think it's really good. There's some containment happening, but I put this in and then I was like, I don't know why I have it in here. And then I'm like, I love it. I'm going to leave it in. So this is by an artist named Tomer Hanukkah. So I hope everybody understands Gestalt principles, or you're at least beginning to get an understanding for it. Tomorrow I'm going to hand out the next assignment after we get done with the critique. And it's going to be about the Gestalt principles. And we're going to, what I'm going to do, and I'm just going to go over it real quick, but we'll go over it again tomorrow, is you're going to find a series of images, just like we did for this past assignment, but you're going to have to find an image that represents in a strong way each Gestalt principle. And then you're going to have to do a drawing that has the same setup that's completely different from the original image that you picked. But it's going to be set up the same. So you're going to take that original image, look at the stuff that's creating the Gestalt principle, take those basic shapes and turn it into something else. That make sense?
We're doing 5 separate images?
Yeah.
Or 6?
Six. Yes.
Okay, so 6 separate images, that one that will just show each Gestalt principle?
Yeah, and then you're going to draw something that goes along with that,
Gotcha.
with the same setup, showing the same principle, but being something completely different. It'll be like looking for things in the clouds, right? So you're going to look at this and you're going to be like, oh, that looks like this, and you're going to make that out of it. I have examples to show you tomorrow. I just wanted to give you a little preview because I usually do that on the same day as this, but I thought I'd give you this slideshow today because you can use some of these Gestalt principles if you're having trouble with a focal point in your abstraction. Okay. So you can take what we went over today and use it in your abstraction to help enhance something in a quick way before we have our critique tomorrow. Any questions? Does anybody have any questions about the first assignment notes that I gave you? It's okay to ask them here. I want everybody to get all the points, so it's really easy to do it. If you made any mistakes, you can redo it and hand it in.
When do we have to hand it in by?
By the last day of class.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, because people missed 1 or 2 points. And if it doesn't matter by the last day of class, then you don't need to redo it.
Okay, so just
Not that many.
whenever we have free time.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you what's that? I'm sorry. Ruby, go ahead.
Okay. One of when you graded mine, you said that we should talk about it in class because there was a few things that you said you disagreed on it, like something basic.
Yeah.
I don't remember off the top of my head.
Let me look at the notes and we'll talk about it tomorrow.
Awesome. For the first assignment?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I mean, I think I disagreed with your primary and your secondary focal points.
All right, that's fine.
If you can convince me why you thought it, I might buy it. Like,
I'm very persuasive. We'll see how it goes.
no big deal. Anybody have any other questions? So what we're going to do for the rest of the day is we're going to continue working on abstraction for the critique tomorrow. And before the critique tomorrow, I will explain critique a little for those of you that haven't been through it. And we'll talk about how you can't take anything personal. We're just here to learn. So if any mistakes are made, we're going to talk about them, and you'll be allowed to correct them until the last day of class. So it's
totally.
It's a safe space where we all can talk about things freely. I just don't want anybody insulting people's work. But you can certainly be critical about it if you see something that could be improved. Okay.
It's awful, guys. We're so mean to each other. It's only negative feedback. Terrible.
I've had people in a perfectly nice critique come out really upset. There's no reason for it. It's perfectly fine. It's just a learning experience. But I'll talk about that more tomorrow. So what I want you to do for the rest of the day is work on your abstraction assignment. I'll be here if you have any questions. Sonia, I know you emailed me those ones. I thought we should just look at them now. And then anybody else can, oh, no, I emailed you back, didn't I, Sonia?
Yeah, I think you did, yeah.
Did it make sense what I said about the arbitrary value?
I think so. I'm gonna like play around and then I'll show you if I.
That's perfectly fine. And if anybody else has anything you want to show me before tomorrow, that's perfectly fine too. But I'll be here. I'm going to take a quick break and run to the restroom real quick. I'm going to come back, and if anybody has any questions, you can ask me. Okay?
Cool.
I will be right back.